Across humanity, stories witness us, and through them we see, we hear, and we grow. I'm Pauline Chu.
And I'm Peter Rizzi, and this is Book Feels, a podcast about how books made us feel and how we feel about books.
So today we're covering The Giver, which is a young adult novel published in 1993 by Lois Lowry. It follows Jonas, a 12-year-old boy who grows up in a seemingly utopian society where there is peace and order, but also no color, climate, or even variety in topography. In this sameness, Jonas is content, but his world is completely changed when he's selected to be the society's new receiver. His mentor, called The Giver, trains Jonas by giving him generations of memories from times before the sameness. Jonas experiences true joy and true pain for the first time in his life and struggles with his newfound emotional depth and the subsequent isolation he experiences. So, Peter, this was a really interesting book for me to read. This was the first book that we've covered that I hadn't read and you had read, and this is your choice, obviously.
Aha, gotcha.
I know, finally, Peter, catch up to me. Sorry. I'm kidding. But yeah, so I had a really interesting experience with this book. It felt very abstract, and our conversation itself felt pretty abstract when we discussed it. Tell us why you chose this book and what it means to you.
I've read this book a lot, and from a young age. I probably read it the first time when I was maybe 9 or 10 and kept coming back to it. We get into it in the episode about some deeper introspection into why this book stood out to me the way that it did. And yeah, for us, it was a different experience. Our conversations did feel a little bit more abstract and philosophical because this is a philosophical dystopian novel.
Right. Yeah. And there is a plot, but it is not as plot heavy, I would say, as the other books we've covered. So it was really about ideas and concepts.
It was.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to get into it. So let's go.
Pauline, when we were discussing The Giver before this episode, I actually felt a little self-conscious because this is a dystopian novel. There is weird, creepy, terrible things happening in this book. And this is a book that I read as a kid. It's a book I read often as a kid. And coming back to it now, through a good chunk of the book, I was like really enamored with the community.
You really were.
Like into it. And it speaks to, I think, this really deep sense I've had ever since I was a kid that the world we live in is profoundly damaged and backwards and missing so many key elements. And to me as a kid, like, you know, when I was 9 or 11 or however old I was first reading this book, to see a community where things were organized, things were peaceful, people had roles, people talked about their feelings, it was enamoring.
Yeah, I think there is definitely something very seductive about the first part of the book because it's so orderly. I remember you saying that you really enjoyed that if people like made a slight against each other, an immediate amends would be made. And that's just, that's not how our current society functions. It's true, like, you know, your younger self was correct that this world is incredibly damaged. And people hurt each other in this world, and we hurt ourselves too. And I don't blame your younger self for wanting something easier.
Thank you for helping me not feel so self-conscious about my identification with what is, like, as we find out later in the book, a deeply disturbed community.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the things that you liked?
I think what I mentioned, the organization, the people had roles, that everyone was cared for, everyone had enough to eat, everyone had a place to stay.
This is true.
Yeah, I like order. I like mechanicalness. You know, maybe I think my tolerance for that is probably higher than a lot of people's, but I think it speaks to, like, as a kid, what a deep longing I had for something different than what I was experiencing. And I think where I see it most clearly is there's these traditions, you know, before the family unit goes to bed, they discuss a big feeling they had from the day. And when they wake up, they discuss any dreams they had in the previous night. And we later find out this is kind of sinister. Like, they're kind of policing the citizens and their feelings and their dreams.
For love, it's for information gathering. something.
But for me, there's this really, I don't know if beautiful is the right word, but there's a moment where Jonas shares with his mom, "Mom, I'm nervous about my ceremony of the 12s." The ceremony of the 12s is kind of marking the end of studenthood and the beginning, or end of childhood and beginning of adulthood.
Right.
And he goes to his mom, and she really helps just kind of be there for him and say, like, yeah, you're growing up and things are going to change, but you're going to like what you're going into. And, your friends are going to change as well. And you'll always have these memories. So she kind of helps him
Yeah.
make sense of his growing up. And for me, I had such key moments in my childhood where I went to my parents for help with the confusion and pain that comes from growing up. I'll never forget two very well, there's many, but two that from like a, you know, preteen, even like 10-year-old sort of um age. I had a conversation with my dad where like I had my first crush at school. And, I think I was in the 4th or 5th grade, and I tried to talk to him about it, and he just said, "I think you're too young to be feeling this sort of way." And I had another conversation. This was, maybe a year or two later, before my first day of middle school. I was really nervous. And I went to my mom's room and tried to talk to her about it and say, I'm scared, I'm worried. And she was just could not be in that world with me. She could not empathize with me, and ended up saying some kind of really scary and
Yeah.
damaging stuff instead of just being with me in this moment of need and acknowledgement of growing up. And when they go to the ceremony of the 12, something that happens is they tell each child, thank you for your childhood.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of acknowledgement
Yeah.
that pervades these early sections of the book that I can see reading now, like, oh, I really identified with this when I was a kid.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really tempting to want that. How lovely to have a parent who is like very even keeled, and can provide a really caring and like truthful response. Like, you mentioned that Jonas talks about how nervous he is, and his parents tell him like the truth of what will happen, how like he will be placed somewhere that he's meant to be placed, and that he probably will lose touch with his friends a little bit. It'll be different. Like, these are things that are okay to expect, and that he's going to be fine. And they know that because they themselves went through it, and everybody before them went through it, and back and back and back, as they say in the book. So it definitely stems from having such an orderly society that like you kind of know what everyone's life path is. As we see later, the cost is that like anyone who deviates from that path is killed. But I'm sorry, Peter, I'm still creeped out by it. But I understand when you're a kid and you are living in chaos, that is very appealing.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it makes sense. It gives me a lot of sympathy for the whoever started that society and like proposed this way of living, because they were probably in incredible pain and chaos. So they wanted to just like make a world that was nice for people. It's incredibly hard because humans are, when you say that you're somebody who can tolerate mechanical routine a little better than most humans, I think of you and you're like, you eat the same breakfast every day.
Same lunch usually too.
Yeah. And I'm the opposite of that.
I'm not a serial killer, I promise.
I don't think you are. No, but it's true that like, unfortunately, humans are variables. They just they're not mechanical, and we see that a lot later in the book, that like they have to deal with people like that. But I get it. Like, I wish that we could have that. And I do think we could have it. It doesn't mean we have to be in a dystopian society to have a mom who can respond to us correctly. Like, there's something that feels very childlike about it because it's a simpler way of looking at the world.
And in this simplicity, like you said, it's not reality. Like, humans are variable. Is so much more to things. And I think the book does a really good job of initially showing us, oh yeah, there's a lot to like about this world, and then we see the darker underbelly that really comes out. And yeah, like you said, the impetus for creating this community came from, we imagine this is happening sometime in the future. This society came from hunger and starvation and war. And it was this, okay, let's remove everything that is difficult, remove everything that is harsh, and keep things orderly, keep things peaceful. And the mechanism for how they do this is there is one person in the community who is in charge of holding and carrying the burden of all of humanity's past suffering, the generations and generations back. He holds these memories and shares it with, as we find out, Jonas. Jonas is to be the new receiver of the community, the person who receives these memories. And that's where we start to really see the community kind of unravel through Jonas's eyes.
Yeah, it's interesting that the current receiver, who also is called the giver because he's giving these memories to Jonas, holds like millennia's worth of memories, and in those memories are joy and pain, and from both of those come wisdom, and that's why he has to exist, because he's needed when they are, when the society comes up against something that they are unfamiliar with and they need wisdom, and they put it all in this person. I think that's interesting. Like, I feel like that happens even outside, like in our reality, that there's somebody who is wise because they let themselves see like the whole truth, or a more whole truth than other people can handle. And so they are the wise ones, but it comes at a cost to them.
I think we both identify with that persona a little bit. And it's
Yeah.
interesting reading this book now, knowing how much I identified with it as a kid. Unconsciously, I must have felt that way as a kid, that I did see things more deeply and more wholly than people around me did.
Yeah, there's this really interesting thing that happens to Jonas in the beginning, and it kind of just keeps happening, where he starts to see the color red. And
color is one of the elements that's been removed from the community as part of giving all these memories to the receiver.
Yes, exactly. Anything that is, I think, that could spark creativity or difference is removed. And
they call this the sameness.
Yes, which is so creepy, Peter. I'm sorry.
Capital S, sameness.
So creepy. I think because I really like being unique, so it freaks me out. But Jonas, I mean, actually, I have ambivalent feelings about being unique. I do really love it, and then I also sometimes really hate it, which we'll talk about. But I think Jonas sees red and nobody else sees it. And it's kind of like probably how you and I both felt as kids, or we would see things and it felt like everybody was just like la-di-da-di-da, like they didn't see anything that was going on. And I was like, but it's red. Don't you see it? That's exactly how I would have felt as well.
I have a great quote that really captures what we're talking about, this idea of seeing more deeply. Mirrors were rare in the community. They weren't forbidden, but there was no real need of them. And Jonas had simply never bothered to look at himself very often when he found himself in a location where a mirror existed. Now, seeing the new child and its expression, he was reminded that the light eyes were not only a rarity, but gave the one who had them a certain look. What was it? Depth, he decided, as if one were looking into the clear water of the river, down to the bottom, where things might lurk which hadn't been discovered yet. He felt self-conscious, realizing that he too had that look.
Yeah, that's such a beautifully written passage. I think it's interesting that like the difference is what makes him deeper in society, and also like rare, and we think of rare as a positive adjective, but I think for Jonas it's not positive. It means he sticks out. It makes him self-conscious. It makes him scared of being seen in a particular way. And I relate to that ambivalence, that like there's like obviously depth to my differences and extreme loneliness.
In the community, the way that these deep seers are differentiated is they have light eyes.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any ways that you would show to someone as being different, or what is it like to be someone who sees more deeply? Obviously, it's not that we have a physical distinction that like they do in the community, but yeah, what makes us different? Why do we feel different?
Yeah. I remember I read this book called I think it was called Fatherless Daughters. It's like a collection of testimonies by women who grew up without their fathers, whether it was physically or emotionally, like that their fathers were gone. And obviously, my dad left so early. So I read that book, and somebody had written that they wished that they had a big scar on their face so everybody could just see that they were different, that something had happened to them. And yeah, like I think that when it comes to emotional scars, you and I, no one would really look twice at us in the society we currently live in. But it is hard. Like I remember when I was in Vietnam, in 2019, I was in my late 20s and I was with a friend. Everybody who goes to Vietnam who's not Vietnamese, uh, kind of just sees it as a fun touristy place. They're like, yeah, Vietnamese people are so friendly. They're so hardworking. I had such a good time. They always say stuff like that to me. And
Everything's so affordable.
everything's so affordable. Yes, they say all these like, I don't know. I understand why they're saying it because like it's not like it's not true. Like Vietnamese people are like kind of bubbly when you meet them in Vietnam, but everywhere I looked, I just saw like evidence of the war and how it was still affecting my home country, even though I like wasn't born there. And I saw like the country everywhere I looked, there was someone with like a physical deformity because of Agent Orange. It was everywhere. I had never seen so many in my life. Or just the amount of poverty that I saw there. It it really disturbed me because I knew, I don't know, like I didn't know these people. None of my relatives live in Vietnam anymore, but they still felt like my people. And it was very lonely to be the one who saw the country in its entirety. Like, yes, it is more modern now. Yes, they're getting by, I guess, but also they carry this history that is like still very present in them and in their diaspora, which I'm part of. And it felt really hard to like have basically no friends who could see that. Even my Vietnamese friends couldn't really understand me. And I think that comes from having a certain level of um, depth in the way you see things. And I think a lot of writers feel this way too, that you just kind of see the world in a particular way that can be really isolating for you.
Yeah, depth, just like in that quote we just read. And this is something that Jonas talks about in the book, is it's lonely and isolating
Yeah.
to be the sole seer.
Mm-hmm.
And I relate with what you shared in so many ways, obviously in different ones. But I mean, one that just comes to mind from this week, I was working this week and I'm not used to working downtown, and I was working downtown and I had put in a to-go order for lunch at like a fast casual place downtown. And I get there to pick up my lunch and there's like 30 people waiting for their pickup orders. Like they're way behind schedule with all their pickup orders. And there's like 2 to-go bags on these shelf with like 30 people all just waiting for their to-go orders. And the staff is like all people of color, front of
Mm.
room, back of room, um, you know, maybe like English as a second language speakers. And there's all these angry people like yelling at them for their food.
Oh God.
And it's just me, and I'm just watching this just kind of like vitriol and just terrible, chaotic situation. And all I'm thinking about is like, gosh, like this world we live in where people are like just worked to death,
Mm-hmm.
where you come from and what you look like dictates what kind of opportunities you have, and where like we treat people as disposable, as just a means to an end. And at the same time, I can see it. People just want their lunch, like they have to get back to their work days or whatever. But just this moment of really like clear seeing of like, gosh, this is just making me deeply sad right now.
Oh yeah, I know. There's so much in there. That there's so much the intersection of like the racial injustice of our society and how the system is built for a particular demographic, and then also the kind of capitalist machine that kind of churns people in and out and makes people mean to each other. Like
Yes.
they make people see each other as commodities. And to these people who want their lunch, like the workers are commodities who like just kind of pop out their lunches. And they themselves also feel like commodities because they're probably like in a hurry to get back to work, you know? And that's just kind of the culture in this society. And it's really hard to be the one who sees it. And then it's just like, if we all saw it, it could probably change.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
it's funny, like going back and reading this book, like we talked about so many of the ways I identified it. It was like, oh, like even like 9 or 11-year-old Peter was a socialist. Like he did not want this capitalist machine that turns people into commodities. But yeah, it's exactly what you said, and
Yeah.
um, can be a lonely and isolating burden
Yeah.
to be the one who sees.
I think also it can be an isolating thing to be the one who feels. I know Jonas talks about there's this heartbreaking scene where the giver gives Jonas the memory of like a sunburn, and like I think also eventually the memory of like breaking a leg. And he goes home and can't talk about it to his family. Like he's not
He's
allowed
not
to talk
allowed
about
to.
his training with his family. But also I think he wouldn't even be able to explain it to them because they've never known pain. And there's a great quote that I'd love to read.
Yeah, I think in the community, whenever you have a bit of pain, they immediately medicate away the pain as quickly as possible.
There's this one part where Jonas gets back from his training and his father asks, "Is something wrong, Jonas? You're so quiet tonight. Aren't you feeling well? Would you like some medication?" But Jonas remembers the rules. No medication for anything related to his training, and no discussion of his training. At the time, for sharing of feelings, he simply said that he felt tired, that his school lessons had been unusually demanding that day. He went to his sleeping room early, and from behind the closed door he could hear his parents and sister laughing as they gave Gabriel his evening bath. They have never known pain, he thought. The realization made him feel desperately lonely, and he rubbed his throbbing leg. He eventually slept. Again and again he dreamed of the anguish and the isolation on the Forsaken Hill.
It's hard to imagine a world without pain, where pain has literally been removed.
Yeah.
I think you and I, some of the times we struggle with our relationships with other people is that they know pain, but they refuse to see it. This is different. They truly have no idea what pain is.
Before I was able to articulate my grief, I don't know if I would have ever been able to connect with someone over it. It was incredibly difficult, and it does make you feel really alone when you're just with it by yourself. And because I think there's nothing to do with pain except to experience it and also maybe to share it. That's all you can do with pain. And Jonas can't do like either of those things quite very well right now because he's completely alone.
No, on the next page, he goes to the giver for his training the next day, and he asks him, but why can't everyone have the memories? I think it would seem a little easier if the memories were shared. You and I wouldn't have to bear so much by ourselves if everybody took a part. The giver sighed. You're right, he said. But then everyone would be burdened and pained. They don't want that. And that's the real reason the receiver is so vital to them and so honored. They selected me and you to lift that burden from themselves.
Peter, this really reminds me of how we've talked about it so often and with such compassion that when people feel pain, they naturally want to push it away, and they turn to tools to push it away, whether it's drugs or other sorts of like compulsive behaviors.
Other people.
Yeah, other people, even just like something as minor as like watching TV or even I think like meditating can be used to try to avoid feelings, you know, like so many things can be used to avoid feelings. And you and I both have a lot of compassion for people who don't want to feel pain because like who does?
And we do it too.
Yeah, totally. But also at the same time,
I think we both deeply really connect with that line there, that they selected me to lift that burden from themselves. Like it's frustrating to feel things so much more deeply than other people do.
Yeah. And it's frustrating to be, I think you and I were both sort of the weirdly the sources of wisdom in our family. Like I think
Yes.
people came to
Even
us
as kids.
as children. Yeah, as children I was always told that I was unusually wise.
Right.
And that's not okay. Because like it clearly shows that like even if you are not feeling the pain, you're giving it to somebody. And this is a really extreme example of it where they're literally giving it to one person.
And I can think of the ways growing up where I was made to feel like I shouldn't be as sensitive as I am, and I shouldn't feel as deeply as I am. And I think it's exactly this, that because me doing that means that everyone is burdened and pained. For me to speak my voice and speak my truth and to say
Mm-hmm.
what I like, what I don't like, this is okay, this isn't okay. It's like, that's inconvenient. You should
Yeah.
stop doing that.
Yes.
You're going to make me have to feel my pain. I hear someone very specific's voice when I say that out loud. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, maybe it wasn't those exact words, but it was pretty darn close.
Mm-hmm.
And for me to move towards the light in my own life really challenged people and really core relationships who weren't doing the same and didn't want to have to face their pain.
Yeah. You know what? The receiver, that role really reminds me of the don't talk, don't trust, don't feel rule. Like literally all of it is like personified in this one character. And that's essentially what we were put into. That was the structure that we were born into, both of us and our families. And
Yes.
we both have kind of dedicated our lives to bucking that structure because like it's bullshit and it makes us suffer.
Give me your wisdom, but not your burdens or your pains or your
Yeah.
sensitivities. Just give us the wisdom, please.
Yeah. Don't make me feel anything.
Uh,
Oh, we're not bitter.
what else comes up with this is, as we're talking about the receiver and the things that were taken away, it's not just memories of destruction, of devastation, or memories of joyful play or joyful celebration. It's also art. It's books, music, and it's led to this society and community where people don't really feel.
Yeah.
They are unable to truly feel. Jonas even goes to his family and asks them, "Do you love me?" And they ask him to use more precise language. If your question, Jonas, were, "Do I enjoy you?" the answer would of course be yes. But when he asks about love, they say it's a meaningless word.
And that was so shocking for me to read because I was like, love is the most meaningful word to me. Although it can be hard to define for sure. And because it's such a it's a large word that encompasses a lot to me. But yeah, I think there's also a point where Jonas is biking and realizes, he's thinking about how happy he is while he's biking. And it's a deeper type of happiness than he's ever felt before. And he realizes that every feeling that they've talked about while they were doing their like sharing feeling time around the dinner table wasn't the true feeling. Like when his sister says that she was angry about something, she was really just irritated, like mildly irritated. She didn't know what true anger was. And similar, his mom doesn't know what true sadness is. And now Jonas knows what true happiness is. And I think that is what comes with having all the memory. Knowing true pain means you also know true happiness. And we've talked about this before, that like when you turn off your feelings, you can't really pick and choose what you turn off. They all turn off.
I think this idea that, without any feelings, there can't be the good ones either. It's something that you mentioned has kind of been like a core question and concern for you, is like, can there be love and compassion without pain?
Yeah.
And I know you've struggled with it and you've wished to say yes, like that we can be loving and compassionate without knowing pain. And that some key teachers for you, some key people for you have said, no, that pain will always exist and suffering will always
Yeah.
exist. And I think it's a difficult question that we both kind of grapple with. We
Yeah.
want to imagine that we can certainly create a world where there's less pain and we can be less harmful to each other. You and I have embarked on that path.
Yeah.
In our relationships and in the ways we lead our lives. But yeah, what do you make of that existential question?
It's so hard, Peter. And for listeners, like, you're not going to get an answer from us. Like, we don't know. But like, I spend a lot of time thinking about this question because I do think that there are people in the world who haven't really suffered as much, who like have had relatively calm and easy lives. And I want to believe that they can be compassionate. I want to believe that they are kind and that they can feel compassion for those who are less fortunate. I will say that like the pain that I've been given, like the only way it was able to transform was into compassion and to creation. I think for sure pain can help you become more compassionate. I think also pain can keep you from becoming compassionate because you don't want to face it. A life without pain, though, I don't know. I don't know. Like you mentioned my teachers, like, I've mentioned this to you before. Thich Nhat Hanh has said that that he doesn't believe that you can have compassion without any pain. He does say though that like pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional, and that's a Buddhist saying or a Buddhist concept. Um, I have a hard time wrapping my head around that. Like I'm still very much learning how to come to terms with this world on its own terms, because the world is a really harsh place. And also to know that like loss is inevitable, that like you can love someone and you'll lose them always, because human life is finite, and also like change is inevitable. I don't know what to do with all of that,
I don't have an answer for you, Pauline.
You sure, Peter? Aren't you like my God and Savior?
I when I reflect on this question, for me, the one thing that really resonates deeply with me is this idea of hope. And some of my teachers, they've always talked a lot about hope, because when you're in one world, you can't imagine what a better world quite looks like.
Right.
But you can hope. And we've seen over the course of history that like things have changed, and some things have changed for the better. And, there have been struggles where the people who were struggling could never imagine what it was like to not be enslaved, or to, in whatever struggle you want to see, right? And there's this theme of being able to hope, and sometimes people have attached hope to a spiritual presence, a God, whatever it is. But I do think there is this human tendency to hope and to strive, and maybe it's more pronounced in some humans and less pronounced in others. Maybe it takes a certain amount of, I don't know, gumption to get things over the mantle, but I think we have to continue hoping that better things are possible.
That's honestly, that actually, I mean, I don't think we want to talk about the end now, but let's get to it. Like how Jonas is like literally walking into like a fog of snow. It does not know what's going to happen next, but he has this odd like compulsions, like something's pushing him to keep going, and he knows it's going to be better somehow. Like he doesn't know exactly, but I think he has faith that it'll be better. Like wherever he's going next, his little brother will be able to survive. Like I think that's what he believes. And to have that faith, like he's literally dying while he has that faith, and then he like takes a sled, and like an unknown sled, and just like sleds off into the distance.
And sees village with lights in the windows.
Yeah, like it's just like to have that faith is incredibly challenging, and I think it does take a lot of strength.
Just to give some story context around this ending you're describing, Jonas is leaving the community. He's decided alongside the giver, the previous receiver, that it will be best if the community does have to share in the burden of the memories, that Jonas and the receiver don't have to hold it all by themselves. And it really comes to an impetus when Gabe, who's a newborn that's been living with Jonas's family unit, is going to be released. And releasing is a process in the community that occurs when essentially someone doesn't fit in the community. And Gabe has been a restless child. He hasn't developed strongly. And what we find out much later in the book is that releasing is actually murder. It's a lethal injection. And when Jonas finds this out, that Gabe is going to be lethally injected, he's willing to risk everything, not only to create the vision that he and the giver have for the community, that they'd like for everyone to share in the memories, and that the giver will stay behind and help them navigate these memories, but that he wants a better future, or not even a better future, just a future for Gabe. He's not willing to just see him die.
Yeah. I think he loves Gabe. And
he knows to love now because of the memories he's been given.
He knows how to love. He knows what love is now because he remembers it. And I think he knows he's fucking up their plans a little bit because he's leaving. They have this whole plan laid out, and then what's thrown into it is that Gabe is going to be killed. And so Jonas has to leave way earlier than he planned. He doesn't, get to see the giver one more time because the giver was going to give him a bunch of stuff. It was going to give him like courage. It was going to give him bravery and wisdom.
Form of memories.
In the form of memories, yes. And he was going to, I think, also supply him with some things. And they were going to like leave town in a specific way. But Jonas can't risk that because he will not let Gabe die. And there's this really like lovely quote, not necessarily about Gabe, but I think that encapsulates this concept. So when they're talking about their plans and how Jonas wants, like Jonas is planning on leaving. The giver is planning to stay behind, as you mentioned, because he wants to help the townspeople adjust and bring them through the pain of feeling the memories that Jonas will kind of give to them. And Jonas says to him, "I want you to come, giver," Jonas pleaded. "No, I have to stay here," the giver said firmly. "I want to, Jonas. If I go with you and together we take away all their protection from the memories, Jonas, the community will be left with no one to help them. They'll be thrown into chaos. They'll destroy themselves. I can't go." "Giver," Jonas suggested, "you and I don't need to care about the rest of them." The giver looked at him with a questioning smile. Jonas hung his head. Of course they needed to care. It was the meaning of everything. I think caring for somebody isn't necessarily logical. If Jonas was completely logical, he would have left Gabe to die.
There's this quote that follows up from that. I think it's a bit later, or maybe it's just before, but around the same section of the book. And it's a short quote that I'll read where Jonas is narrating, but he knew he couldn't go back to the world of no feelings that he had lived in so long. It's like once the curtains are peeled back on all that does exist, no, of course they can't go back to not caring about other people. It's human instinct to care for each other.
Yeah, he's given the memory of war, and he's given the memory of, watching a soldier die in front of him. And that is an incredible tragedy to bear, and in his small little 12-year-old body. And it feels like, of course, once you experience that and you want you're able to keep hold of your convictions that you want a better world, then you have to care. Otherwise, what's the point? Like, otherwise you turn off your feelings, and I think that's what's so interesting about this book, is also that Jonas is given, these aren't his memories. He's given like generations and generations worth of memories. And that they come with such pain, such joy, but also this like very human quality of wanting to take care of each other, of wanting to preserve life because life is precious.
I feel like this is coming at such an interesting moment for you, Pauline. Right now, you are reading your grandfather's memoir, and all these sort of intergenerational wounds, strengths that, you have felt in some way, that exist inside you in some way, you're kind of getting this more direct access to through your grandfather's words. And what do you think? Is it better that Jonas, in this unique way, has access to the memories themselves from past generations?
I don't know if I have a proper answer to that. I think that I know from my perspective, like, the book has a morality that I think it's trying to convey. But from my perspective, in my experience, reading my grandfather's memoir has been incredibly troubling and really hard for me to stomach. But there's something inside me that keeps pushing me to read it. I could easily just shut it and never read it again. My grandfather and he was the one person in my family who I was pretty close to. I mean, as close as someone could be, in my family. We didn't have long talks or anything, but I know that he kind of liked me the most. I don't know. And I liked him. We were able to talk. He was the only grandparent who really talked to me because he spoke both English and French, and I was able to converse in both of those with him. And he really encouraged me to go to France. He encouraged me to get educated in a way that like no other family member really valued my intelligence. And he also was a great man. Like, he got his family out of Vietnam. He took care of them. He like started like a business in the US. He was the American dream. He succeeded really well in America. But then reading his memoir in Vietnam and seeing how he was part of the old regime, the autocratic regime, and how, I don't know, his interactions with the communists, he was also an anti-colonialist, so he was aligned with the communists at one point. But his memoir is so complicated, and how he paints himself, I can tell that he probably didn't have any self-awareness for how he was coming across. But it really troubled my view of him as a person. I really wondered about his morality and how he treated other people and how maybe he didn't care about other people in a way that that I think every human should care about people. It's given me a lot to build my own compass around. And it's widening my worldview quite a bit, and that's great for me. But it hurts because he was like the person I like love him, and I still love him. But it's hard to see somebody who actually did a lot of damage on a larger scale.
It just makes me think of this theme, depth. And yeah, it's certainly a deepening, but a complicated and kind of terrible one in some ways.
Yeah, I think like depth doesn't come without discomfort at the very least. Um, and I know from experience that that discomfort and that pain can lead to something very beautiful if you're able to stick with it. But it doesn't mean I enjoy the process.
It's interesting, and I think we've talked about this on the podcast before, that my lineage intersects with Vietnam in a way too, in that my maternal grandfather was a lieutenant colonel in the US Army who fought in Vietnam. And there's a part of me that thinks that I could receive more direct memories from that and it not feel too personal. But seeing how it's affecting you, I don't know. I don't know if it would feel personal to hear more details, because I think it would be the same situation where I see my grandfather, I know some of his qualities, and I also know that those memories would be really painful and really difficult ones, and that there would be a lot in there.
Yeah. I think if we expand that out as as writers tend to do, is that all humans are connected. Yes, I feel this way because it's my grandfather. That is a closer connection, and also I knew him, and he was a very respected person in my family. Um, so it feels very personal. But I think like I mentioned to you, when I was in Vietnam, I didn't know any of those people, and yet I felt so connected to each and every one of them through this like shared
Right.
history. And if I think in my practice, part of the Buddhist practice is to connect with every single living creature, because we're all part of the same ecosystem. But it's painful. It's painful to feel yourself connected to so many things, because a lot of things are in pain.
It is painful, and I think my answer still is yes. I would want the memories, and
Mhm.
yeah, I just for what we said, for depth, for seeing clearly, for seeing more deeply,
Yeah.
I think it can be really painful. And yeah, for both of us, there's been no recovery, no healing, no growth, no thriving without facing that pain in all of its forms and all of its depth.
I was a little shocked to realize, wow, there's no art in this world. And you were like, yeah, there's no books, no music. And I was like, there's no poetry. Like, I couldn't imagine a world without poetry. And now I'm thinking, like, actually, a lot of poetry does come from anguish and love, both. I think, I think what's great about poetry is that it captures, um, like the intersection and complexity of many human emotions at the same time. And yeah, I don't think I want to live in a world without poetry or love.
And Jonas, for all his heroism, asks these same questions and struggles with these same concerns. There's a quote: Jonas did not want to go back. He didn't want the memories, didn't want the honor, didn't want the wisdom, didn't want the pain. He wanted his childhood again, his scraped knees and ball games. He sat in his dwelling alone, watching through the window, seeing children at play, citizens bicycling home from uneventful days at work, ordinary lives free of anguish because he had been selected, as others before him had, to bear their burden. But the choice was not his. He returned each day to the annex room.
That's so relatable. Even now, as I say, I don't want to live in a world without poetry. There's still gonna always be a part of me that it's like, can't we just be in a world that doesn't hurt? Like, can't we just have that? A part of me will always kind of want, um, you know, that ignorance, because they do say ignorance is bliss for a reason.
This is just such a humdinger of a quote to capture it all. And I love that it ends with, but the choice was not his. He returned each day to the annex room. And
Yeah.
there's some mechanical elements to that where, he's been selected and the community will not accept him. He's not allowed to ask for his release because the previous receiver before him in training, when she was given all these memories, asked to be released, knowing what that meant, knowing that it would meaning the end of her life. It was that painful for her to receive these memories. And so Jonas mechanically can't, but I also think there's an element of he knows he needs to keep moving towards the light. Just in what we're talking about, that, it can be hard to ask for these memories and this pain, but what else are we going to do?
Yeah, what's the alternative? The alternative is that quote unquote release,
right?
Which is such an interesting way to phrase death, that this person just couldn't handle, or not handle, because I don't want to say that she wasn't strong. It's just that she chose this release because of the weight of this pain. It was just too harsh and too much. And I can understand her perspective completely. I think you and I and every human, even now in our own reality, like, this book is obviously an exaggeration, but we also are given the choice kind of to face our pain and to face our lives because life is painful, or to choose quote unquote release. And that alternative is just it's not an option that I can consider.
It reminds me of another quote we read, the one where Jonas says once he had these feelings, there was no way to go back. Like it's hard to unsee once you begin to see.
Yeah, but it's also okay to have the wish of wanting to go back.
It is. It is. And Jonas has that wish.
Oh, Peter, I feel like this episode we're a little all over the place because it feels so, I don't know. I think it wrestles with some pretty deep questions of life that are hard for me to even now to grapple with.
It does. I'm glad we read it. I'm glad we covered it.
Yeah, maybe if we do multiple seasons of this podcast, we'll have an answer.
Stay tuned.
You can find Book Feels wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Instagram at bookfeelspodcast or email us at bookfeelspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.